7 Guys. One of the biggest acts in music history. Billions of streams, sold-out stadiums, a spot at the United Nations General Assembly. But here's what most people skip past: none of this was supposed to happen. BTS didn't come from a major label with deep pockets and industry connections. They came from a small company that was one bad quarter away from shutting down. They came from families that told them to quit. From schools that failed them. From cities nobody in the Korean entertainment industry cared about. Before the Grammy nominations and the Billboard #1s, these 7 people were just kids dealing with rejection, financial pressure, identity crises, and the very real possibility that their dream would go nowhere. The past they came from isn't a feel-good origin story dressed up for PR. It's a set of actual facts, documented, verifiable, and quietly heavy, that change how you hear their music once you know them. Who almost didn't make it past the first year? Who was told his voice didn't fit? Who carried his whole family's financial survival on a teenage dream? Let's go back to the beginning. Number 7, the boy who almost chose math over music, RM. Kim Namjoon grew up in Ilsan, a quiet satellite city just outside Seoul, the kind of place where becoming a global rap icon wasn't exactly a listed career option. By every conventional measure, his future was already mapped out. He scored in the top 1.3% of the entire nation on South Korea's college entrance exam, the Sunyoung, one of the most brutally competitive standardized tests in the world, a single-day exam that South Korean students spend years preparing for, and which essentially determines the trajectory of their entire adult life. His IQ has been documented at 148. He was, by any academic standard, the kind of student Korean parents dream about. The path to a prestigious university, a stable profession, financial security, it was all right there. He walked away from it. What makes that decision land harder when you understand the cultural context? In South Korea, academic achievement isn't just personal ambition, it's social currency. The pressure on high-performing students to follow the conventional path is institutional, familial, and deeply psychological. Namjoon's parents were not supportive of his music career initially. This is something he's addressed directly in interviews. His mother, in particular, opposed it. Choosing rap in that environment wasn't just unconventional. It was, by the standards of his world, throwing everything away. He had started writing rap lyrics around age 11, heavily influenced by artists like Epic High, a Korean hip-hop group whose introspective, literary style left a clear mark on how Namjoon would eventually approach songwriting. He taught himself conversational English almost entirely through the American sitcom Friends, which explains both the fluency and the specific cadence he developed. By his early teens he was already performing under the underground rap name Runch Randa, building credibility in a scene that had nothing to do with idol culture. He auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment and was signed not as a trainee being molded into an idol, but specifically for his rap ability. That distinction mattered enormously because Big Hit was, at the time, a struggling small agency with a fraction of the resources of the major 3, SM, JYP, and YG. When the original BTS lineup was being assembled, it went through significant changes. Several members who had been part of the early formation left before debut. Namjoon stayed, and was eventually named leader of the group, a role that would place him in the position of spokesperson, translator, and public-facing voice of the entire team at every major international appearance, including the UN General Assembly address in 2018, and the subsequent speeches at UNICEF events, which he delivered without a script in English in front of world leaders and diplomats. His songwriting credits span the full length of BTS's discography. He has been involved in writing and producing music that deals explicitly with his own psychological experience, the pressure of intelligence that never felt like enough, the guilt of disappointing family, the specific isolation of being the person everyone looks to for direction. The 2015 track Namjoon wrote, Reflection, addresses his personal struggle with self-worth in terms that are precise and undecorated. Not metaphor for the sake of art. Just what he actually felt. Number 6, the trainee nobody thought would last, Jimin. Kim Seokjin was a communications major at Konkuk University in Seoul, one of South Korea's reputable mid-tier universities, when a big hit entertainment street scout approached him near a subway station in 2011. This is not a myth or a PR narrative polished for fan consumption. Street scouting is a documented, standard recruiting practice in the Korean idol industry, where agency staff position themselves near universities and transit hubs looking for faces that fit. Jin was approached because of his physical appearance, plain and simple. He had no dance training, no vocal training, no background in performance of any kind. He was a university student studying film, interested in acting, with zero intention of becoming a K-pop idol. He almost didn't get in the car. According to his own accounts in interviews, he initially thought it was some kind of scam, a reasonable assumption, given how common predatory recruitment schemes were in that era of the Korean entertainment industry. He went along with it cautiously, was brought in, auditioned, and was accepted as a big hit trainee. What followed was not a smooth transition from promising recruit to polished performer. It was years of grinding work from a starting point of near zero in the specific skills the industry demanded. Here is where the facts become genuinely uncomfortable. Jin was training at Big Hit during a period when the company was financially fragile. Big Hit had debuted one prior boy group, 2AM, under a joint system with JYP, and was attempting to establish itself as an independent label with its own roster. The budget constraints were real and documented. Trainees at Big Hit during this period have described conditions that were considerably more austere than what the major agencies offered: smaller facilities, fewer resources, and the constant background anxiety of not knowing whether the company would survive long enough to actually debut them. Jin trained for approximately 2 years before BTS debuted in June 2013. 2 years of vocal lessons, dance practice, and performance coaching to build from scratch what many of his fellow trainees had been developing since childhood. Several of the other BTS members had been training in performance-related disciplines since their early teens. Jin was learning fundamentals in his early 20s, while simultaneously watching his university peers follow conventional career paths. He has spoken candidly in multiple documented interviews about the psychological weight of being the least experienced member technically, and about how that gap between himself and his groupmates drove an obsessive work ethic that he maintained throughout the early years of BTS's career. What gets overlooked in the broader BTS narrative is how specifically unusual Jin's position was in the idol system. The Korean idol industry is built on a pipeline that starts young. Trainees are typically recruited between the ages of 12 and 16, shaped over years into performers who debut in their late teens. Jin entered that pipeline at 18, already older than the typical starting point, with a background in none of the required disciplines. The system was not designed for someone like him, and he made it work through sheer volume of practice. His vocal development over the years between debut and BTS's international breakthrough is audible and documented across their discography, a measurable, traceable arc of improvement that reflects exactly the kind of disciplined, unglamorous work that doesn't make headlines. Number 5. The kid who rapped to survive his own mind, Suga. Min Yoongi grew up in Daegu, South Korea's third-largest city, and a place with a cultural identity distinctly separate from Seoul, more conservative, more traditional, and significantly further from the center of the Korean entertainment industry in every sense that mattered. Daegu is not where Korean pop careers are built. It's where people leave from, if they're ambitious enough and lucky enough to find a way out. Yoongi was ambitious. The luck part took considerably longer. His family's financial situation during his childhood and teenage years was not comfortable. This is something Yoongi has addressed with unusual directness across multiple interviews, lyrics, and the extensive personal monologues BTS released as part of their Suga, a Mun on the Jungfrau, and various Bangtan content. He is, among the 7 members, the one most willing to describe his past in concrete, unsentimental terms. He worked a part-time job at a recording studio as a teenager, not as an internship or a learning experience framed positively, but because he needed the income, and because it gave him access to equipment he couldn't afford otherwise. He has described eating 1 meal a day during certain periods. These are not vague references to hardship. They are specific, documented claims he has made repeatedly across years of interviews. His parents opposed his pursuit of music with particular intensity. In the Korean cultural framework of his generation and socioeconomic background, music, especially underground rap, the genre Yoongi was gravitating toward, represented financial instability and social failure. His father wanted him in a stable profession. The disagreement was serious enough that Yoongi has described it as a rupture in his family relationship during his teenage years. He continued pursuing music anyway, which meant doing so without family financial support and, for a period, without family approval. He was producing beats and writing rap lyrics in Daegu's underground scene before he was 17, performing under the name Gloss. The underground hip-hop scene he came from had a specific ethos, authenticity, lyrical substance, and a hard line against anything perceived as commercial or manufactured. Idol culture sat at the opposite end of that spectrum in the eyes of that community. When Yoongi auditioned for Big Hit and eventually joined the Idol trainee system, he was, from the perspective of the underground scene he came from, crossing a line that carried real social cost within that world. He has been public about experiencing depression and was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, information he disclosed himself, most extensively in his 2020 mixtape, D2, and in the accompanying documentary content. The mixtape track, Amygdala, released in 2023 under his solo alias August D, addresses specific traumatic events from his past, a car accident his mother was involved in, the psychological weight of his family's financial struggles, in clinical, precise language that makes the emotional impact land harder precisely because it avoids melodrama. He traveled from Daegu to Seoul to audition for Big Hit with enough money for a one-way bus ticket. That detail, which he has confirmed himself, is not a dramatic flourish. It is a logistical fact about a teenager who had calculated exactly how much risk he was willing to absorb, and had decided the answer was everything. The music he makes now is built from the specific weight of everything that came before it. None of it was manufactured. Number 4. The dancer who almost broke before he could begin, J-Hope. Jung Ho-seok grew up in Gwangju, a city in the South Jeolla province of South Korea, with a history that carries genuine political and cultural weight. Gwangju was the site of the 1980 pro-democracy uprising in which hundreds of civilians were killed by military forces, an event that shaped the city's collective identity in ways that outsiders rarely register. It is not Seoul. It is not close to Seoul. And in the geography of the Korean entertainment industry, that distance is not just physical. It is structural. Agencies scout in Seoul. Opportunities concentrate in Seoul. Growing up talented in Gwangju meant that talent had to travel to find its market. Ho-seok started dancing at a young age and was, by his early teens, genuinely exceptional at it. This is not fan community inflation, his background is documented and verifiable. He trained in popping, locking, and krump at a Gwangju dance academy, and by his mid-teens was competing at a level that produced measurable results. He won first place at a national dance competition in 2008, when he was approximately 14 years old. That result wasn't symbolic. In the Korean youth performance circuit, national-level competition wins are the kind of credential that gets noticed. He was a street dancer and a member of a local dance crew before he ever entered the idol system. His reputation in Gwangju's dance community was established before Big Hit found him. He was scouted, not through a random street encounter, but through his visible presence in the regional dance scene. What followed was the standard trainee process, but Ho-seok entered it with a technical foundation that most trainees spent years trying to build from scratch. He was, from the beginning of his time at Big Hit, regarded as the strongest dancer in what would become BTS, a position he held through debut, and maintained across the group's entire career, consistently cited by choreographers and fellow performers as a reference-level technician. What is less frequently discussed is the psychological dimension of what Ho-seok carried into that trainee period. He has spoken in interviews and in BTS's documentary content about the experience of his mother leaving the family when he was young. He has not elaborated extensively on the specifics in public, and that restraint is itself worth noting, in a group where several members have been remarkably open about family difficulty and mental health. Ho-seok has tended to address this particular subject briefly and then move forward. What he has confirmed is that the absence shaped him, and that the relentlessly upbeat public persona he became known for in BTS's early years was, in part, a conscious performance of positivity that he maintained even when it didn't reflect his internal state. His 2022 solo mixtape, Jack in the Box, and its follow-up content represented the first time Hoseok systematically dismantled that persona in public, deliberately releasing music that was sonically dark, lyrically confrontational, and visually unsettling compared to everything his audience associated with him. The album debuted at number 17 on the Billboard 200. It was the work of someone who had spent years as the group's designated energy source, deciding, at the peak of his career, to show what was underneath it. He arrived at big hit as a teenager from a city the industry didn't look at, carrying a credential from a national competition, and a personal history he kept mostly private for a decade. The dancing was always visible. Everything else took years to surface. Number 3, the teenager who carried his family's future on a school desk, Jimin. Park Jimin grew up in Busan, South Korea's second-largest city, and its busiest port, a place with its own distinct dialect, its own cultural texture, and its own relationship to Seoul that carries a mild but real undercurrent of regional identity. Busan is not a backwater. It is a major city. But in the specific geography of the Korean idol industry, it functions as a place you leave if you want to compete at the highest level, and Jimin left it at 15 to do exactly that. He was accepted into the Korea Arts High School in Seoul, known colloquially as Yuwon, on the strength of his contemporary dance training. This acceptance is the foundation of everything that followed, and it deserves to be understood in its proper context. Korea Arts High School is genuinely selective. It is not a performing arts school in the casual sense. It is an institution that produces professional-level performers, and admission is competitive in a way that filters out students who are merely interested in the arts from those who are already demonstrably skilled. Jimin was admitted to the dance department, which meant he had reached a level of technical proficiency in contemporary dance significant enough to clear that bar while still in middle school. What this also meant was that at 15, he left his family in Busan and moved to Seoul alone to attend a specialized high school while simultaneously training as a big-hit entertainment trainee. The dual structure of his adolescence, full-time arts high school student and idol trainee simultaneously, is a logistical reality that rarely gets the attention it deserves. He was not choosing between school and training. He was doing both, in a city away from his family, at an age when most of his non-industry peers were navigating the comparatively ordinary pressures of standard high school. The financial dimension of his family's situation has been referenced in Jimin's own words across multiple interviews. His family was not wealthy. His father worked in public service. The investment his family made in his arts education and his move to Seoul represented a real financial stretch, which meant the pressure Jimin carried was not simply personal ambition. It was the specific, heavier weight of knowing that people who loved him had committed resources they didn't easily have to support a path that had no guaranteed outcome. He was, by his own account, the last member to join what would become BTS, added to the lineup approximately 6 months before their June 2013 debut. That timeline is not trivial. It meant Jimin had the shortest preparation period of any member before the group went public. He has described in documented interviews his acute awareness during that early period of being newer, less prepared in the idol-specific skill set, and deeply uncertain about whether he belonged. His contemporary dance background was exceptional. The performance style required for idol work, synchronized group choreography, stage presence calibrated for a very specific industry format, vocal performance while executing complex movement, was a different discipline, and he was learning it under a compressed timeline. His response to that uncertainty was documented by his own teammates. Multiple BTS members have confirmed in interviews that during the trainee and early debut period, Jimin would remain in the practice room after everyone else had left, not occasionally, but habitually, consistently, as a pattern of behavior driven by the specific anxiety of feeling like he had less time than everyone else to reach the level he needed to be at. He left home at 15 carrying other people's hope alongside his own. The hours he put in after midnight in an empty practice room were the answer he gave to that weight. Number 2, the boy Busan left behind until he wasn't. Kim Taeyoung grew up in Gyeochang, a rural county in South Gyeongsang Province, not Busan, which is where his official profile has sometimes been simplified to, but a genuine countryside farming community where his family worked agricultural land and where the infrastructure, opportunities, and proximity to the entertainment industry were as far removed from Seoul as it is possible to be while still being in South Korea. This distinction matters because it shapes the entire context of how Taehyung entered the industry, and what he was navigating when he did. His grandfather raised him for a significant portion of his childhood while his parents worked. This is a common arrangement in rural South Korean families where economic necessity requires parents to take work where it's available, and it is a detail Taehyung has confirmed and spoken about with genuine warmth in multiple interviews. His relationship with his grandfather was, by his own account, one of the most formative of his life. He has cited it as a source of emotional grounding, and has referenced it in the context of explaining his own attachment to family as a value. But warmth aside, the factual reality is that he grew up in a low-income rural household, away from the metropolitan infrastructure that feeds the Korean idol industry, with no obvious pipeline into it. He learned to play the saxophone during his school years, a detail that speaks to an interest in music that predated any contact with the idol system, and one that his parents actively supported by paying for lessons despite the financial difficulty that represented. His father, according to Taehyung's own accounts, made concrete sacrifices to cover the cost of those lessons. The saxophone is not the instrument of someone being groomed for K-pop. It is the instrument of a kid in a rural town who was drawn to music in whatever form was locally accessible. He auditioned for Big Hit in Daegu, not because he intended to audition, but because he accompanied a friend who was auditioning, and was approached by Big Hit staff at the event. This is a documented fact he has described in interviews multiple times. He was not there for himself. He was there as support for someone else. The staff who noticed him in that context and encouraged him to audition were responding to something that registered without any performance or preparation on his part. He auditioned on the spot and was accepted. What followed was a trainee period that lasted approximately 1 year before BTS's 2013 debut, among the shorter trainee periods of any member, comparable to Jimin's compressed timeline. But what distinguishes Taehyung's pre-debut period is something more unusual. Big Hit kept his existence largely hidden until the day of BTS's debut. While the other members were being gradually introduced to the public through the label's pre-debut social media strategy, a series of blog posts and video content that built anticipation, Taehyung was not revealed. Fan accounts and industry observers from that period have documented genuine surprise at his appearance on debut day. The label's decision to withhold his introduction was a strategic one, but for Taehyung it meant spending his trainee period in a form of deliberate obscurity, preparing for a public moment he had no public build-up toward. He has spoken in interviews about the emotional difficulty of his early career years, specifically about homesickness, about the distance from his family in Gyeochang, and about the psychological adjustment of moving from a rural community where he was known into an industry where he was starting from nothing. His 2023 solo album, Layover, and its accompanying interviews represented one of the more candid periods of self-disclosure in his public career, addressing identity, uncertainty, and the gap between public perception and private experience with a directness that was notably different from his earlier public presentations. He showed up to an audition he wasn't planning to take, in a city that wasn't his, for a company that then kept him invisible until the moment it didn't. Everything he built came after a beginning that wasn't even supposed to be his. 23.37. Number 1, the child prodigy who almost burned out before the world knew his name, Jungkook. Jungkook was born in Busan in 1997, which made him 13 years old when he auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment in 2011. 13. That number is the starting point for understanding everything that follows, because it means that virtually every formative experience a person has, the development of identity, the navigation of adolescence, the construction of a self, happened for Jungkook entirely inside the Korean idol industry, inside a single company, inside a group that would become one of the most scrutinized musical acts on the planet. He did not have a before in any meaningful sense. Big Hit was his before. He auditioned during Season 1 of Superstar K, the Korean televised singing competition that functioned as one of the primary public talent pipelines of that era. He did not make it past the preliminary rounds. That rejection, at 13, from a nationally televised competition, is the first documented data point in his public career. He was not yet good enough to clear the initial filter of a television talent show. What happened immediately after is where the story pivots. Multiple agencies noticed him during the audition process despite his elimination and extended offers. He received interest from several labels, which is a remarkable thing to say about a 13-year-old who had just been cut from a competition, but reflects the specific quality that industry professionals were identifying even at that stage. He chose Big Hit because of RM. This is a fact Jungkook has confirmed directly and repeatedly in interviews. He was shown footage of Namjoon, at that point an underground rapper with documented credibility in Seoul's hip-hop scene, and that footage was the deciding factor. A 13-year-old from Busan chose his future based on the authenticity he perceived in a teenage rapper from Ilsan. That decision, made at an age when most people are choosing electives, locked in the trajectory of his entire life. He moved to Seoul at 13, and began training at Big Hit while simultaneously enrolled in school. The trainee period that followed lasted approximately 2 years before BTS's June 2013 debut, which means Jungkook debuted at 15. 15 years old on a stage as a professional performer, in an industry that would within a few years become globally dominant. The members who trained alongside him were older, some by several years, and had backgrounds in dance, rap, and vocal performance that he was building from a significantly earlier developmental starting point. He has described in interviews feeling acutely aware of that gap, and responding to it the same way Jimin did, through volume of practice that exceeded what was required, driven by the specific anxiety of being the youngest in a group where the standard was already high. What distinguishes Jungkook's pre-fame reality most sharply from the other members is the totality of what he surrendered to enter this path. Suga left Daegu. Jimin left Busan at 15. Taehyung left Gyeochang. But each of them had lived some portion of a life outside the industry before it consumed their daily existence. Jungkook entered the system at 13, which in practical terms meant his friendships, his education, his social development, his understanding of who he was outside of performance, all of it formed inside the specific pressure cooker of idol training and then global fame. He has addressed this in documented interviews with notable self-awareness, describing the difficulty of understanding his own identity and preferences independent of the role he has occupied since early adolescence. His 2023 solo debut with the album, Golden, and the extensive interview cycle that accompanied it produced some of the most candid public reflection of his career, specifically around the question of who he is when the performance stops, a question he acknowledged he is still in the process of answering. That honesty, from someone who has been famous longer than he was anonymous, carries a specific kind of weight. He was 13 with a rejected audition tape, and a one-way move to Seoul. The world caught up to what those agency scouts saw a decade later. He's still figuring out what he saw in himself.